Ozone is a gas. It is O3, whereas oxygen is O2. So it's pretty similar in its chemical makeup to oxygen, but it has a third oxygen atom on there, which makes it unstable. But that gives it all the beneficial properties that we want from it. So the ozone therapy part comes in when you take this gas and you apply it into the body in some capacity. So that can be done as an IV. It can be done, like you said, rectal insufflation, which is probably the best. There's a lot of different ways to apply it. So you'll see people using it for ozone water, ear insufflation, limb bagging. A lot of people have like, isn't there the ozone layer, or isn't ozone a pollutant? So there's a lot of this like half information or things that people have heard about. And so people come to this thinking like, well, I've heard that's not good for you. So what's up with that? So we're going to real quick go through safety. But there's essentially 5 different areas I look at to inform myself. And I think the evidence is pretty overwhelming on ozone and how it can be applied. I'm going to list these off and then dig into them slightly more. But 5 areas I look at: biochemistry established, approved in over 20 countries, made it through FDA safety standards, which is, the governing board for regulatory on medicine. There's clinical reports on it. One is over 300,000 treatments assessed. This is over 2,000. It's actually over 2,500 medical studies on ozone now. And there's over 10 million treatments done per year. When it comes to the biochemistry, the reason why people kind of get stuck on ozone or are like, isn't that dangerous or something that you can't do if you Google it online? The reason is because you can't breathe ozone. So if you breathe ozone into your lungs, it's irritating. It's not dangerous, but it is irritating. And over a long period of time, if you're in constant exposure to it, it could actually cause like prolonged or sustained irritation to the lungs. So like coughing and things like that you would get from it. But there's a reason why you can't breathe it, but it can be applied to other parts of the body. And the reason for that is because when you're breathing in, what are you breathing? You're breathing oxygen. So you're an aerobic person. You need to be able to breathe in oxygen. So your lungs don't have what's called an antioxidant buffering system there, so that you can take that oxygen in and use it to create energy. Because if we had an antioxidant buffering system there, we wouldn't be able to take in oxygen very well because it would bind with the antioxidants. So we actually don't want that there. But that antioxidant buffering system is in pretty much every other part of the body. So when we take something like ozone and we apply it to, say, the blood or into the colon, it's going to interact with the antioxidants there. And that's going to start what's called a cascade effect, which is where we get the benefits from. So essentially the ozone goes in, interacts with the defense mechanism called the antioxidant buffering system, and then we get the beneficial properties from there. And then on top of that, there's clinical reports that are done. This is the one that has over 300,000 treatments. The adverse event rate was lower than the use of aspirin, like one of the safest things that we know of. And so it's extremely, extremely safe from according to that clinical report. And there's over 2,500, this is 2,500 medical studies on it. And those range in credibility. So some of them are like the most credible study that you could ask for, and it's like done wonderfully and all that kind of thing. And what I mean by credibility is that it's like very repeatable, very scientifically done, very expensive. And then on the other side, you have doctors that are seeing patients and, they just make observations. So they like would say, I had 5 patients with this thing and I applied ozone and this is what I saw. Yeah. But the overall theme I'm getting from all these studies is its safety, incredibly safe. I mean, over 2,500 medical studies verifying that. That's hundreds of thousands of patients.
Wonderful.
Within that. And there's over 10 million treatments done per year. But let's get into the good stuff. So what does it actually do? On a very base level, it's helping with inflammation. But there's a level beneath that I think is pretty important for correcting things like inflammation or correcting things like the immune system. And these are the 4 fundamental aspects of ozone therapy that I like to point out. It does more than that. And then I'll kind of tie those into inflammation and how that works.
Okay.
But essentially it works with the immune system by balancing it out. So some people have an autoimmune disease, and that's when the immune system is attacking the body. So in that case, it would actually quiet down the immune system. On the other side of it, if somebody's like really sick, they have a lot of bad bugs in their body, and their immune system isn't working, it's not killing off the bad bugs. Well, it raises it up. That's called an immunomodulator when it balances the immune system. And ozone is really good at doing that.
There's no really natural therapies to balance the immune system. I mean, we see in conventional medicine, we try to balance it with Imurin, azathioprine, those types of immunomodulators, but they're drugs and biologics. This is helping as a catalyst for the body to naturally balance itself. If someone was very low and their white blood cell count was low, or they're hyperactive with Crohn's colitis, this helps to act as a catalyst to naturally balance the body in a safe way. I mean, that's revolutionary.
Or when you correct something like that, it causes autocorrect autocorrection in a lot of other parts in the body. So that's why these four things are so helpful, is because we're working with your ability to use oxygen, your ability for blood to flow throughout the body and get nutrients and gases to where they need to go. Then we're working with oxidative stress, which is essentially when you get too many of these things called free radicals and it starts to break cells down. But it works with those four different things, and you can set inflammation right on top of that. And once you correct this down here, that inflammation starts to reverse into a healthier state. So that chronic inflammation can be extremely helpful with. And I'm not saying like this is the tool in the box that's going to solve all your problems. Obviously, this is one of the things, and there's the aspects of lifestyle and diet and what that looks like that are going to be the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
But introducing something like this can I would say either accelerate where somebody is at or be kind of that incremental last, those last pieces that they're starting to plug in
Yeah.
and be helpful. But you couldn't apply this and outwork like a bad diet if you have Crohn's colitis,
No.
like it's
Yeah.
just never going to fix it.
How do we recalibrate the immune system naturally? Well, we have food, we have de-stress, meditation, sunlight, those types of things, but actual alternative therapies to modulate the immune system and recalibrate the body. It's not that much potential of what this could do long term. I mean, for those who are stuck on biologics, it's just suppressing the immune system for life, or those stuck on steroids, or those stuck with this hyperactive immune system that diet's not doing it, or even meditation's not doing this. This is a legitimate alternative option we can use as part of our whole plan, right? To you said, as we change our diet, as we work on our stress, this is a viable option we can really consider here today to say, can this help mediate my immune system response long term in a safe way? That is exciting.
This was like pretty largely used in Cuba for a really long time, which I'm not saying like that's why to do it, but it's kind of interesting because Cuba, Fidel Castro came in and essentially established a pretty bad government, and they got, the United States didn't want to have to do with them and all that kind of stuff. So economically, they really declined. Like if you go back there, they're still using cars from like the 50s and stuff. Like it's economically just doing really poorly. But for their hospitals and for their standard of care, they had to choose things that would be really inexpensive, that would work for a lot of different diseases, and was pretty easy to apply. And one of the things that was very commonly used was rectal insufflation. There was an entire hospital,
Wow.
believe it or not, that was dedicated to this through Dr. Sylvia Menendez, and you can look her up. She has a lot of literature out there and research, like just on all sorts of crazy stuff you would never imagine being rectal insufflation being used for. Is like, how does that work with chemotherapy or like all this kind of cool stuff? But for a very long time, like hundreds of thousands of patients in these studies that they've done. So pretty cool. Essentially, as we age or have disease, our body loses its ability to use oxygen. And what that means is it's not how much you're breathing in, that's just how much oxygen is being carried into your lungs. But how well your cells actually take and convert oxygen to energy is a very fundamental aspect of the body. And what ends up happening as you get sick or as we start to age, we can't get rid of this thing, right? Like we are going to be going downhill to a degree as we get a little bit older in terms of physicality. Obviously, like character and like those other things get better with time. But physically, we reduce in our ability to recover or deliver oxygen, reduce muscle mass, more likelihood Alzheimer's, dementia, failing mitochondrial function. And that is directly correlated with our ability to utilize oxygen. So one of the things that ozone has been shown for is its ability to mitigate that process. So that's going to happen at a slower rate. So rather than going like maybe like down at a slant like this, you're going a little bit more across. You're still going down, but not nearly as quickly. And I'm going to get into how this helps with chronic disease in a second, but this is just to validate kind of its use for oxygen efficiency for somebody who's healthy. They did a study where they treated these professional athletes that were soccer players. I think this was in Turkey. And they essentially found that they were able to run for much longer periods of time, and their VO2 max was increased, which is how much oxygen you're able to use as you're exercising. So really, that's like super impressive, by the way. Some of those statistics, like 28% VO2 max and a 20% increase in running time is like almost unheard of. And it's not considered a doping agent, but like with how much of a improvement you're getting, it pretty much is doping. Like it's really impressive. This is another one kind of saying the same thing.
Not only can I help modulate my immune system, but I can increase my athletic performance, my VO2 max. So it might be able to calm down my gut response while allowing me to be running my fastest 10-mile pace ever.
It's a balancing mechanism. So ozone is not the thing. Your body does actually natively create ozone, and that's like published in Science, which is like one of the top journals.
Hmm.
But it's causing a stimulus to the body. So whereas a drug is kind of like forcing a certain response in the body, ozone creates a stimulus or a platform for your body to be able to do what it does well. So the difference there is that we're creating an opportunity for our body to do what it needs to do rather than forcing it to do something. And that's a really important distinguishment, because if your body is performing well, it's going to outperform any drug. And so that's really what we're doing. And that's why it can be used in so many different applications, is because it's not ozone. Ozone is a catalyst, like it really does help, but it's the fact that it's a stimulus and your body takes it from there. So essentially, when you put this into the body, your body does this little like kind of overreaction thing where it's like, oh, shoot, I need to fix a bunch of stuff.
Hmm.
And then it just kicks on all these systems that it needs to do. And it doesn't just jump up to where it needs to go. Like if you're too high, it also brings you down, which is what makes it super fascinating. That's like the same thing, by the way, that you would get from like exercise or doing a sauna. Is it's like, it's not the sauna itself, although that's the catalyst you need.
Yep.
It's what your body, the reaction it takes from that sauna. And that's what ozone is doing too.
It's not the ozone doing it. The ozone is a catalyst for your body to get the reaction that we want, right? It's
Yeah.
the match, and then the body's reacting to that match. It's a form of oxidation that's causing a massive surge of antioxidants to flood the body.
So here's another one on the topic of oxygen efficiency. So again, oxygen for making energy. Well, we looked at athletes. What about the other side of it? People who are sick. And what's better than chronic fatigue syndrome? People who have like a energy deficiency, right? So in this study, they took 65 patients and they measured how severe the chronic fatigue syndrome was. Then they applied ozone therapy to these patients. And what they found is over 80% of the patients had over a 50% improvement in symptoms. This is just one tool. So like
Wow.
this is not like the end all be all again. But that is absolutely incredible for one tool to have that big of an impact on something as difficult as chronic fatigue syndrome. Like that's something that people can't get out of, like Crohn's. It's just really, really tough to figure out.
And I can attest that since I've been doing ozone, I do notice an energy spike, especially in the first hour or two after doing it.
So microcirculation, I know this is a little bit of a graphic picture here, but this is a gentleman who has basically tissue that's dying on his feet because he's not getting proper blood flow to the area. And so you can kind of imagine the same thing happening on a really small level to our organs, our brain, all the different important parts in our body. And that's what microcirculation is doing, is it's allowing nutrients and gases and things that we need to get to all sorts of parts of our body. And when we get sick, we decrease in that ability. And when we age, we decrease in that ability. So it's really important. And ozone therapy is kind of next level in its ability to modulate microcirculation, because it works with things like peripheral vascular disease, peripheral arterial disease, and pretty severe issues within that. This is spike protein causes clots, which is an issue that's been arising in the last few years. And there's a lot of clinical observations on ozone resolving that.
We're seeing that the ozone helps with the circulation of blood, which carries our oxygen, which is also going to help in the healing response. And if you're anemic, and if which is also going to cause low blood circulation, you're not going to be able to heal as well. And so if we can get that circulation moving throughout the body, that might also cause more of a healing response in places like the colon or large intestine, where we might have ulcers and damage and leaky gut and things of that nature.
Yeah,
So we're
exactly.
having a systemic increase in oxygen throughout the body, which is needed to heal.
Well, yeah, and here's an example of how circulatory issues, like what are the problems they cause. In all these clinical trials, which you can go and read, which means that they're a pretty impactful study, like that they're pretty quality. People are getting more inflammation, more pain. Their their brain isn't as healthy. They don't heal as fast, and so when you improve circulation, all those processes improve. And this would be an example again of how this works with like stroke patients or people who have a traumatic brain injury. Is that this was actually a more interesting study, just in the fact that it was kind of selective. So it was almost intelligent. But again, this goes back to the point of why ozone works in so many different capacities, is because in this study, what they found is if patients were not hypoxic, meaning they already had proper blood flow to the brain, ozone didn't affect it. Whereas if they were hypoxic, it did affect it drastically, like a 30% increase. So what that means is it was almost like intelligent in what it did. But again, it's not the ozone, it's the intelligence of your body. So we're creating a catalyst for the intelligence of your body to take place. And that's why this can be helpful with like stroke patients and traumatic brain injury. This is another study on, this is more about preconditioning, which means that if you say you're going to get into a car accident, which I hope nobody plans that, but you know, say something traumatic like that is going to happen. Let's pretend you did ozone therapy prior. You're actually going to be more equipped to handle the stress of that event than if you did not do ozone therapy. So in this study, they had rats and they had different groups, and one of the groups did ozone therapy prior to them inducing a heart attack. So they would do one group, they didn't do anything. One group, they did infrared light, and one group, they did ozone and infrared light. Then they gave the rats a heart attack. And the ones that did ozone almost had perfect heart condition afterwards. Wow. So it allowed them to handle the stress of that situation much more effectively. So there wasn't nearly as much mitochondrial damage and just damage overall. So what it's essentially doing is that we're putting this stimulus into the body, and the body kind of does this little freak out. But then it corrects a lot of stuff. And one of those things is antioxidant production. Antioxidants are really important for the health of the cell and just the body in general. So if we have proper antioxidant production in those cells, which is better than supplementing, by the way, because now our cells are creating them. Like I want it made from my own body rather than needing to take it in from the outside. So now my cells are creating this protective element that allow me to, whatever I go through, to be more protected on a cell level than if I had not done that. Again, this slide, we kind of laughed about this at first, but all this means is that ozone is the catalyst for balancing out these very complex systems in your body. Mm-hmm. So you have kind of this war that's always happening in your body. And what it is, it's this very delicate balance between like free radicals or antioxidants, or this cell and this cell, this molecule and this molecule. And what the body is trying to do is do this balancing thing called homeostasis and keep everything in line where there's these really tight loops, because you don't want it going one way or the other. Like sometimes we think of a molecule as like good or bad. Like some people hear of like glutathione and think, wow, that's a really good molecule. Yeah. Well, not if you have way too much of it. Like there's ways to overdo it, and your body needs to have this really tight balancing system. And that's what ozone is facilitating. So, but in most cases, glutathione improvement is good because we often have an antioxidant deficit. Mm-hmm. So this is a study that was done on chemotherapy, and it was a pretty good study. What they found was, what I was saying is that protective element, people who were undergoing chemotherapy and did ozone prior and during the treatments had a 70% improvement in overall quality of life. Wow. So that was in fatigue, that was in nausea, that was in all those characteristic chemotherapy side effects were diminished by 70% if they did ozone. So if you know anybody doing chemo, like I think it's like a no-brainer because it just helps so much. Chemotherapy is, it's a very, very toxic thing to the body. So if you can diminish the effects of that by 70%, you can kind of bet on it's doing that for a lot of other stuff. So I threw on a couple slides here real quick. I told Dane that I had a slide set last week and I don't know what happened. So we put some things together real quick. But in this study, they said ozone therapy combined sulfasalazine delivered via colon therapy system is feasible and effective treatment for ulcerative colitis. I know that's
it's like mesalamine with sulfur. Some people have such a reaction to sulfur, they choose regular mesalamine, but it's a stomach coater. It's an anti-inflammatory. So they're saying, something like mesalamine or sulfasalazine mixed with ozone, they found was a feasible and effective treatment for ulcerative colitis, inflammation, and damage throughout the colon, which is amazing. And I'm assuming this was rectal insufflation.
This is colon therapy system. So and the takeaway from this is it didn't give us a lot of like information on like protocol and what to do, but we have a lot of other studies that kind of do that for us. So, but in terms of ulcerative colitis, they are doing some studies and seeing some pretty good results with it. This is another one on inflammatory diseases, but they said the integration of OAHT, which is ozone therapy, with effective approved drugs, and some of these people aren't quite in the natural mind, so keep in mind these are researchers just being like, ozone, that's interesting. Just combine that with this toxic drug and we're good to go, but is likely to yield the best clinical results in several chronic inflammatory diseases. And going back to those kind of fundamental things of immune modulation, oxygen efficiency, microcirculation, oxidative stress,
Hmm.
correcting those really helps with inflammation. It starts to autocorrect a lot of these other things up the pipeline, so to speak.
And
And just,
inflammation is the big bad wolf with all disease. I mean, it's
yeah,
helping to correct that pro-inflammatory cytokine response. It's mitigating the inflammation, which is the main source of all cancer growing.